The first time my mom called me a worthless mistake, I was 19, standing in the doorway of the only home I'd ever known. Her words weren't loud, just sharp enough to slice through any sense of belonging I had left. My dad didn't look up, busy with his phone, pretending I didn't exist. Neighbors passed by as if nothing was happening. The casual indifference stung worse than anger. I felt a weight in my chest, a mix of disbelief and humiliation, while they calmly packed a small envelope with $47 and shoved it into my hands. No hugs, no soft words, just cold dismissal. Every inch of the room seemed to echo the sentence, "You are nothing here." I stepped back into the hallway, aware of every eye pretending not to stare, every whispering thought I wasn't meant to hear. And yet I didn't cry. Not yet. Before I dive deeper, I have to ask, what would you do if everything you relied on turned to dust overnight? I'm Valerie, and this isn't just a story of being abandoned or betrayed. It's about the quiet choices you make when the world tells you you're nothing. How do you survive, adapt, and rise? Stick with me. I'll show you what happened when I refused to let a single label define my life, and how the tiniest spark can ignite a complete turnaround. Before that day, my life had a rhythm that felt normal, even if it wasn't easy. I was the obedient daughter, the one who never argued, who carried the emotional weight of the household without complaint. I cooked, cleaned, and listened, constantly measuring what I gave against what I received, though the scale was always tilted. My parents' smiles were rare, their praise even rarer, yet I kept trying, believing that love was earned through endurance. School was my sanctuary, but even there, I felt the shadow of being less than, the quiet whispers of teachers and peers who didn't know my name beyond my family's judgments. At home, the rules were clear. Your feelings are secondary, your mistakes permanent, your value conditional. I learned to anticipate moods, to mask disappointment, to perform respect as a shield against ridicule. Every small act of service felt like a repayment for the crime of existing. I gave everything, attention, loyalty, effort, yet when the moment came, it never mattered. I was expendable, a placeholder in a life that didn't truly want me. The world outside seemed vast, but home was a cage built with invisible bars, reinforced by words I internalized. Worthless. Mistake. Never enough. I had lived in a system where survival meant invisibility, and yet I held on to a quiet hope that one day my worth would be undeniable, even if they never recognized it. Even before the day they threw me out, there had been warning signs I tried not to see. Small dismissals, tiny cuts of words that left me wondering if I'd imagined them. My opinions were brushed aside, my achievements minimized. A birthday gift left unopened, a compliment returned with a sigh. These were the quiet indicators that my presence was tolerated at best, invisible at worst. Friends noticed it too. They'd ask why I always seemed hesitant to share news or ask for help, and I would force a smile, pretending it was nothing. I started keeping mental notes. The way my dad would glance at me with mild annoyance when I asked a question. The way my mom's tone sharpened subtly whenever I suggested an idea or shared a hope. It wasn't explosive, it wasn't dramatic, but it was persistent, a low hum of disregard that wore me down over time. I noticed patterns, the excuses, the sighs, the way I was never fully included in plans or decisions. They told me who I was without ever having to raise their voices. At first, I doubted myself. Maybe I was oversensitive, maybe I was imagining slights, but the patterns repeated too often, too predictably, to ignore. Every dismissal chipped away at my confidence, and yet a part of me observed quietly, cataloging each instance, each subtle betrayal. I didn't know then that these early warnings were the breadcrumbs leading me to a turning point that would change everything. The day I was handed those $47 marked the start of a new reality. Their dismissals didn't stop at words, they became a lifestyle I had to navigate. Every attempt to reach out, to explain, to connect, was met with cold indifference. I became a ghost in my own life, a presence that needed permission to exist. Publicly, my parents carried themselves as if nothing had happened, their smiles polished for neighbors, friends, and colleagues. Privately, they ignored my calls, my messages, my attempts to reclaim even a fraction of acknowledgement. I watched them closely, cataloging their behaviors. The subtle ways they flaunted success in front of others, the ease with which they discarded anyone who challenged their narrative. It was almost impressive, if it weren't so cruel. I realized then that their power relied on control and the perception of it. By dismissing me, they didn't just punish me, they reinforced an image of themselves as untouchable, leaving no room for my voice or my existence in their carefully curated world. And yet, the contrast between their public charm and private cruelty was striking. Friends, neighbors, even distant relatives saw only the polished mask, never the casual disdain that had become routine. I had to learn quickly how to survive under their shadow, how to navigate spaces where my presence was questioned and minimized. Every interaction became a test of patience, every ignored greeting a lesson in restraint. I stayed silent outwardly, but inwardly, a quiet determination began to grow. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Each dismissal, each casual insult, only sharpened my awareness. I would endure, I would observe, and one day the scales would tip, not through anger, but through careful, undeniable action. With each passing day, the world outside felt distant, almost unreal, while inside, the isolation tightened like a noose. My parents' rejection was total, calls unanswered, texts ignored, any attempt at reconciliation dismissed with a shrug. Friends offered sympathy, but their words couldn't fill the void or erase the humiliation of being labeled worthless. Nights were the hardest. Alone in my car, with nothing but the hum of passing traffic, I questioned everything. Was I really a mistake? Had I somehow failed before I even had a chance? Gaslighting had become second nature to them. Casual remarks disguised as concern. Maybe you weren't cut out for this life, made me doubt my instincts. I began replaying every interaction, searching for hidden mistakes, convinced that if only I understood where I had gone wrong, they might accept me. But the truth was harsher. Their disdain wasn't about me. It was about control, about maintaining power by keeping me small. Still, despite the exhaustion, I clung to dignity. I refused to beg, to cry in front of them, or to let their words dictate the entirety of my existence. I learned to compartmentalize, pain stored quietly, while I moved through the day performing the bare minimum to survive. Each act of kindness I received from strangers, however small, reminded me that the world wasn't entirely like them. A diner owner who offered me a meal, a warm smile, a place to sit for an hour, they were proof that value existed outside their definitions. In that isolation, self-doubt and resilience coexisted. I began to understand that enduring wasn't passive, it was active preparation. Each moment of quiet suffering was teaching me observation, patience, and self-reliance. And though I could not see the path forward yet, the first seeds of determination had taken root, waiting for the right moment to grow. Just when I thought I could catch my breath, life dealt another blow. The small support I had managed to gather, odd jobs, minor savings, the occasional help from strangers, felt suddenly fragile. Opportunities one thought were within reach slipped through my fingers. A coding course I had invested in didn't provide the immediate leverage I'd hoped for. Doors closed quietly, leaving me with the stark reality. I was still alone, still fighting for every inch of survival. Even the diner owner, my first anchor in this strange, harsh world, couldn't shield me from the relentless tide of instability. Nights in my car, wrapped in a thin blanket, became longer and colder. Each rejection, each failed plan, reinforced the narrative my parents had hammered into me. I was expendable, a mistake destined to fail. The humiliation from the day I was thrown out felt distant but constant, a shadow that whispered, "This is all you'll ever be." The social world seemed indifferent. People I thought could help looked away. Opportunities vanished without explanation. I felt the weight of invisibility pressing down, making the tiniest victories seem meaningless. It was a moment where despair threatened to take over, where I understood why most people give up when the world refuses to notice them. Yet, even in this apparent defeat, I observed. I noticed patterns, the small inconsistencies in who offered help and who withheld it. I cataloged each setback, not as a reason to quit, but as intelligence to be used later. The audience of my life could believe I was finished. They could assume the story had ended with humiliation and abandonment. But quietly, I was learning, preparing, and growing stronger. The false peak of loss was only the prelude to a reckoning they could not imagine. I learned to move through the days like a shadow, present, but unnoticed. The world offered no applause for survival, no validation for getting up each morning with empty pockets, and a restless mind. Yet I endured, quietly, meticulously, treating each day as a lesson in patience and observation. Every glance of pity, every passing whisper, every small act of indifference was catalogued in my mind, a blueprint for understanding the system that had cast me aside. I didn't collapse, didn't allow despair to claim me entirely. Instead, I focused on the minutiae, which opportunities opened briefly and closed too fast, which people offered genuine kindness, which words from my parents revealed their weaknesses. My endurance was not loud, it was strategic. I learned that power often hides in silence, in choosing when to react and when to simply observe. Even as the nights grew colder in my car and the future seemed uncertain, I noticed small victories. A line of code that worked, a stranger's smile, a borrowed book that expanded my knowledge. Each tiny success reminded me that worth existed outside their definitions, and that their dismissals could not dictate my entire existence. By holding myself together through the quietest, loneliest moments, I was cultivating something stronger than immediate victory. I was building clarity, patience, and an unshakable sense of self. And while no one could see it yet, the foundations of a reversal were quietly being laid, one deliberate, resilient day at a time. The turning point began quietly, almost imperceptibly. As I pieced together every slight, every dismissal, every calculated word from my parents and those who had betrayed me, a pattern emerged. Their cruelty was consistent, predictable, and rooted in arrogance. I began to see their methods not as personal failures of mine, but as deliberate actions designed to maintain control. The anger that had once burned so hot slowly cooled into clarity. I could anticipate their moves, predict their reactions, and recognize the triggers they used to assert dominance. Each insult, each public humiliation, became a data point rather than a wound. I realized that their power relied not on me, but on my unawareness and my acceptance of their narrative. Once I understood that, a sense of freedom began to take shape. This recognition didn't come with sudden joy. It came with a steady, quiet determination. I stopped blaming myself for their cruelty. I understood that endurance alone wasn't enough. Awareness had to be paired with strategy. I began imagining scenarios in which their arrogance could be their downfall, where the same predictable behaviors that once humiliated me could become the very tools for my future leverage. For the first time, I felt a shift in control. The helplessness that had defined my past months gave way to observation and understanding. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning, cataloging, preparing. Every insult, every casual dismissal, every whispered, worthless mistake became a part of the blueprint that would eventually expose them for who they truly were. And while no one else could see it yet, I knew the day was coming when my clarity would translate into undeniable public power. While the world believed I was powerless, I quietly built my arsenal. Every interaction, every slight, every moment of dismissal was carefully noted. I kept records, not in spreadsheets at first, but in my mind, in tiny notebooks, and later digitally as I learned to code. Names, dates, conversations, financial missteps, arrogant boasts, all cataloged with precision. The people who had dismissed me, the friends who had turned away, the neighbors who had whispered behind my back, they were unknowingly leaving a trail of evidence for the day I would reclaim control. I also found allies in unexpected places. A kind diner owner, who had once offered me a meal and a safe place to sit, became a quiet mentor. He shared insights about the world, about how observation and timing often mattered more than loud confrontation. I learned to read people, to spot weakness in confidence, and to understand that the smallest gestures could reveal the largest truths. By the time I had a secure footing, I had already identified my hidden advantages: knowledge, documentation, timing, and an understanding of human arrogance. I realized that the very people who had humiliated me were blind to the fact that their patterns were predictable and that their overconfidence would be their undoing. They believed control was theirs because they assumed I was weak. Every contract they signed, every boast they made, every financial or personal misstep was quietly logged. And while I didn't act immediately, I knew each piece of information would become leverage. I had turned humiliation into intelligence, despair into strategy. The audience sees me as a survivor, but what they don't see yet is that I am quietly armed, patient, and preparing for the moment when my hidden advantage will make the public reversal inevitable. By the time the day comes, my knowledge will be complete, my actions irreversible, and their downfall entirely self-generated. The power they thought they owned through their arrogance and cruelty will slip through their fingers, silently, and I will stand, unshaken, prepared to claim what is rightfully mine, not with anger, but with undeniable public truth. As the days turned into months, I realized that the most powerful change wasn't in their actions, it was in me. The humiliation, the sleepless nights, the endless doubt, all of it had forged a version of me I barely recognized at first. I no longer sought validation from those who had discarded me. Their approval was irrelevant. Their opinions no longer held sway over my sense of worth. Calm confidence replaced the desperation I had carried for so long. I learned to trust my judgment, to rely on my preparation and insight rather than fleeting encouragement from others. Each small victory reinforced the truth that I was capable, resilient, and far more formidable than anyone had ever imagined. The power that comes from self-reliance, I realized, is invisible yet undeniable. It doesn't scream, it commands. This internal transformation wasn't dramatic. There were no sudden declarations, no public displays of triumph. It was quiet, steady, and irrevocable. I felt a subtle thrill in recognizing patterns where once I had felt lost, in understanding the motivations of others without letting them manipulate me, and in knowing that every act of patience, every careful observation, was bringing me closer to a reckoning that would be mine to define. Most importantly, I no longer felt trapped by fear or anger. Those emotions, once dominant, had been repurposed into strategy, insight, and focus. I understood that true power isn't revenge, it's leverage. It's the patience to wait, the clarity to plan, and the restraint to act when the impact is inevitable. In that quiet transformation, I found freedom. I had survived, yes, but more than that, I had become unshakable. The girl who had been thrown out at 19 with $47 had evolved into someone who no longer needed permission to exist, someone whose patience and intelligence would turn the tables in ways no one could predict. The foundations of control, the hidden advantage, and the awareness I had cultivated were now ready to converge into action. With clarity and confidence came deliberate action. I no longer reacted impulsively to insults or slights. Instead, every step was measured, purposeful, and aimed at creating irreversible leverage. My first focus was security, financial, personal, and informational. I coded in stolen hours, teaching myself skills that would soon transform survival into independence. Each project, each line of code, was a building block, turning desperation into tangible assets. I documented everything meticulously. Emails, texts, casual boasts, financial records, all stored securely and organized. Every careless word from my parents, every underestimation from those around me, became proof for the day I would reclaim control. I also strengthened my network quietly, finding people who valued honesty, reliability, and intelligence over appearances. These allies were invisible to those who thought they held power, but they would play a crucial role in my eventual reversal. Meanwhile, I practiced restraint. I resisted the urge to flaunt progress, to gloat at those who had doubted me, or to announce small victories prematurely. Power, I had learned, is amplified when it is understated. Each unnoticed step, the late-night coding sessions, the small investments, the quiet acts of planning, was a move on a board they couldn't even see. I had turned observation into intelligence and patience into an advantage no one could anticipate. I also simulated scenarios in my mind. How would my parents react if confronted with undeniable evidence? Which friends, neighbors, or colleagues would be witnesses, whether intentionally or inadvertently? Every possibility was accounted for. I wasn't preparing for revenge. I was preparing for undeniable, irreversible justice that they would unknowingly orchestrate themselves. By the time I was ready, every piece was in place. The financial resources, the documentation, the witnesses, and most importantly, my unwavering confidence. I had transformed every setback into insight, every insult into data, and every period of loneliness into training for resilience. The stage was set, and the moment when my preparation would intersect with their arrogance was approaching. And when it did, the outcome would be complete, irreversible, and utterly theirs to trigger. The first step in reclaiming my life was returning to the very spaces where I had once been diminished. I walked into rooms where whispers had followed me, where eyes had glanced with judgment or pity. Everything had changed, though they didn't realize it yet. I carried myself with quiet authority, the confidence of someone who had endured, observed, and prepared. The aura of calm competence drew attention without a single word. I noticed every detail, the same furniture, the same patterns of arrogance, the familiar smug expressions that once made me shrink. I didn't rush. I didn't announce my presence. Instead, I let their assumptions about my weakness linger, letting them continue believing I was still the powerless girl they had dismissed. Every subtle glance I received, every startled recognition, was a small confirmation that the stage was set. Returning to this arena wasn't about confrontation, it was about timing. The people who had humiliated me were unaware that their actions were now transparent, their arrogance laid bare through my careful observations and documentation. I moved with purpose, measured my words, and let the environment itself become part of my strategy. Even as I engaged, smiled politely, and navigated conversations, I was calculating. Each interaction was a thread I could later pull to reveal truth, each careless boast recorded in my mind and digital archives. They thought the past was forgotten, that their control was intact, but I had become an invisible force, patient and unshakable, ready to transform every familiar space into a stage where justice would be undeniable. The arena was familiar, but the player had changed. I was no longer the girl they had underestimated. I was the architect of a reversal they couldn't see coming. And as I moved silently among them, I felt the subtle thrill of inevitability. The moment when their arrogance would collide with my preparation was approaching, and the outcome would be theirs to trigger unknowingly. Their arrogance had grown unchecked, a dangerous confidence that blinded them to the patterns I had so carefully observed. They spoke freely, boasting about successes and mocking those they deemed inferior. Every word, every careless claim, was a self-incrimination I quietly recorded, cataloged, and prepared to use. They assumed I was still powerless, still small, still invisible, and that assumption would be their undoing. In meetings, at social gatherings, and even in casual conversations, they overreached. They revealed secrets, flaunted assets, and underestimated the patience I had cultivated. I noticed each slip, each exaggeration, each attempt to assert superiority. Their arrogance was predictable, and predictability was my advantage. They didn't realize that every boast was now evidence, every misstep a thread I could pull to unravel their carefully constructed image. Meanwhile, I maintained a calm exterior. Smiles were polite, nods measured, questions innocuous. Outwardly, I engaged as if nothing had changed, as if I were still the quiet, obedient figure they believed I was. But beneath that composed surface, I was aligning every detail, timing every move, and ensuring that when the moment came, the reversal would be precise, undeniable, and irreversible. Their overconfidence led them to underestimate my preparation. Documents they thought irrelevant were now proof, casual remarks became public vulnerabilities, and their own actions provided the leverage I needed. By the time anyone realized the shift, the foundation for their collapse was already in place. What they had intended as displays of power, mockery, exclusion, arrogance, now worked against them. Each overreach magnified their exposure, setting the stage for the inevitable truth to surface. They were writing their own undoing, blind to the fact that I had become the architect of every outcome. In that moment, I understood a crucial lesson. The most dangerous enemies are those who believe they are untouchable. And as their confidence swelled, mine remained steady, knowing that patience, observation, and meticulous preparation would turn their arrogance into the instrument of their public downfall. The day came when everything converged, the patience, the observation, the meticulous preparation. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't confront anyone directly. Instead, I let the facts speak, undeniable in public. The documentation I had gathered, the recordings, the proof of arrogance and mismanagement, all presented themselves in ways that couldn't be ignored. Every boast, every dismissal, every casual insult became evidence of the reality they had tried to conceal. I revealed my success quietly at first. The startup I had built, the assets I now controlled, the investments I had made, each piece a testament to the resilience and strategy that had grown from my suffering. I handed over the symbolic $47, the same amount they had once thrown at me, now returned with the weight of a lesson learned. It was not an act of cruelty, it was a demonstration of undeniable truth. As the details emerged, the room shifted. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, laughter faded into awkward silence, and eyes darted between me and the evidence I presented. The power dynamic reversed effortlessly, not through anger, but through clarity. The world saw the reality my parents had tried to obscure. The girl they had discarded was no longer powerless. I had turned humiliation into intelligence, rejection into leverage, and despair into triumph. Witnesses, neighbors, colleagues, even friends who had doubted, watched in stunned silence as the narrative they had believed crumbled. Every careless action my parents had taken, every moment of overconfidence, now contributed to a public reckoning that they could neither deny nor escape. Their reputation, carefully cultivated over years, collapsed under the weight of facts and timing that I alone controlled. And while the moment was intense, it was not chaos. It was precise, undeniable, and complete. The truth had been released, not as a spectacle, but as an inevitable consequence of patience, preparation, and unshakable self-belief. In that room, the audience witnessed the transformation from victim to victor, from powerless to unstoppable. The girl they once dismissed as a mistake had rewritten the rules entirely, and there was no turning back. The moment the truth settled into the room, their composure crumbled. My parents' confident smiles, once polished for friends and neighbors, faltered. Conversations that had once flowed effortlessly now stuttered. Their carefully constructed image of control and superiority was shattered in real time. Friends, colleagues, and even distant acquaintances witnessed the shift, seeing for the first time the consequences of their arrogance and cruelty. Every casual boast, every dismissive comment, every act of overconfidence that they had thought harmless now worked against them. Their reputation, built over decades of carefully managed appearances, unraveled before a roomful of observers. There was no need for me to raise my voice, to demand attention. The facts spoke for themselves. Their credibility collapsed under scrutiny, each inconsistency and misstep highlighted in a way they could no longer deny. Even the smallest gestures, the subtleties of their reactions, broadcasted their downfall louder than any words could. Eyes widened in disbelief, shoulders slumped in defeat, and the whispers that once belittled me now carried shock and respect. The world saw clearly what I had known all along. The girl they had thrown out, the worthless mistake, had become unshakable, and their arrogance had paved the path to their own undoing. No cruelty was needed. Justice was delivered quietly, efficiently, and irrevocably. The audience, witnessing every micro-expression, every faltering word, every moment of exposed vulnerability, felt the full weight of the reversal. Those who had doubted, those who had ignored, and those who had betrayed were now confronted not by anger, but by undeniable truth. In that public collapse, I remained calm, composed, and untouchable. Every observer, whether friend or stranger, understood the scale of the shift. The girl they had dismissed was no longer invisible. She was unstoppable, empowered, and in control. And as the final echoes of disbelief lingered in the air, it became clear. Justice had been served, and the consequences were immediate, irreversible, and complete. Once the dust settled, the lesson was undeniable. Survival and patience can become the most powerful forms of justice. The girl who had been discarded at 19 with $47 was no longer defined by their labels. I had endured, learned, and transformed every setback into insight, every insult into opportunity, and every moment of doubt into strategy. I chose not to gloat. Instead, I redirected the outcome toward purpose. With the house my parents had left behind as a backdrop to their downfall, I turned it into a transitional shelter for young adults facing the same helplessness I once had. The act was symbolic yet impactful, a demonstration that power is not in revenge, but in creating lasting change and opportunities for others. Those who had doubted me, dismissed me, or betrayed me witnessed the quiet closure of a chapter they thought they controlled. Their arrogance had led to their undoing, and my measured patience had ensured the lesson was permanent. The moral was simple yet profound. Resilience, intelligence, and restraint can turn even the deepest betrayal into triumph, and empowerment is earned, not granted. Just when the audience thought the story had reached its peak, the final revelation landed. Hidden in plain sight, I had quietly purchased my parents' mortgage years earlier, long before they even imagined I could recover. Watching them struggle financially, silently navigating the same challenges they had imposed on me, became the ultimate proof of strategic patience. When they confronted me, demanding recognition, I returned the symbolic $47, the same amount they had once thrown at me, this time as a reminder of the journey from abandonment to empowerment. And then, quietly but deliberately, I revealed my success, the startup, the investments, the life I had built from nothing. The room froze. The arrogance that had once defined them was replaced by shock, disbelief, and a subtle understanding that the girl they had dismissed had rewritten the rules entirely. Yet the ultimate twist wasn't just personal triumph. The childhood home, now a transitional shelter, stood as living evidence that justice can be transformative. Those who had underestimated me saw not only my victory but the purpose it carried, turning betrayal into opportunity, humiliation into empowerment, and pain into meaningful action. The audience, witnesses to every careful step, every calculated move, understood the full arc. The powerless had become untouchable, and the arrogant had been undone by their own blind assumptions. In that final moment, everything aligned. The revenge was legal, irreversible, socially undeniable, and emotionally satisfying. The girl they had called a worthless mistake was now a symbol of quiet dominance, strategic patience, and ultimate justice.